Kumarswami College, Ausa, I feel immense pleasure to welcome all the honorable dignitaries and participants from all over the world here on virtual platform for the International E-Conference on Perspective of Geography and Geographical Mapping. The college is run by Shri Mahavidyalaya Shikshan Prasarak Mandal Ausa and is affiliated to Swami Ramanand Tirth Marathwada University, Nanded. The chief organizer of this international e-conference is Honorable Principal Dr. M. Bedkar Sir, who is the source of inspiration for us. I welcome him as the chairperson of this international e-conference. I feel honored to welcome today's honorable chief guest, Annette Duncan ma'am from Texas, USA, and she is going to deliver a lecture on the topic Diversity in Clinical Trials. I heartily welcome you, ma'am, as the keynote speaker for this international e-conference. I also welcome the whole of organizing committee, convener Dr. Ashture sir, co-convener Dr. Deshmukh sir, executive member Dr. Lahane sir. Now after this, I would like to invite the chief organizer of this international e-conference, Dr. M. Bedkar sir, for his welcome note. Please, sir.
Thank you, Professor Karad sir.
Welcome, sir.
I welcome today's resource person, Annette Duncan ma'am from Texas, USA. It's the Kumarswami Mahavidyalaya College, Ausa from India, organizing frequently international events. In this series, today we are also with our Geography department have organized international e-conference as introduced by our Professor Karad sir. I welcome to all organizing team committee members and the participant researchers joined from various parts of this country and abroad also. As you are knowing that there were 3 resource persons announced at first, but because of some technical problem, Annette couldn't join yesterday and she agreed to join today. So I welcome from my institute to you, ma'am.
Yes.
First resource person was Andrew Johnson. She was delivered yesterday her topic. She was from United States. On 21st, Christina Won madam, she will also deliver her topic from California. So it's the series of the international events, and we are very happy that all the renowned resource persons, those who have invited here, they did their efforts to give more and more to the participants on this topic they have selected. So today's resource person is active in her social work, educational work. So we welcome her, and now over to you, madam, to continue your speech on this topic of this conference. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Bedkar. Thank you for having me. Thank you to your team of collaborators and planning committee for having me. I really do appreciate this opportunity to join you today and to have a quick discussion on diversity in clinical trials from a geographical and geomapping perspective. So thank you again for having me. Good morning, everyone. It is good night where I am, but I'm so pleased to be with you today to discuss diversity in clinical trials, a geographical comparative. My name is Annette L. Brockett. I am a trained lawyer, and I possess a master's of law in pharmaceutical and healthcare compliance. Today, this morning, I'd like to join you to discuss clinical trials, what they are, what they involve, but to focus particularly on diversity in clinical trials. My job is to work with regulators to bridge the relationship between healthcare authorities and pharmaceutical companies. But that bridge cannot truly be formed until healthcare authorities can trust the drugs and medical devices that they are being asked to approve. One of the ways that we can ascertain that they trust these drugs and medical devices is to help them understand that clinical trials are diverse, that the trial participants come from diverse backgrounds and have participated, and the data that is culled from the research is trustworthy data. So that's what we'll be discussing today. So by way of introduction, what are clinical trials? Clinical trials are voluntary research studies, and they're conducted in people. Generally, they don't begin in people, but the trials themselves, when those research studies are on the way, phase 1, for example, they begin in people. And the reason for doing clinical trials is to answer specific questions about the safety and effectiveness of drugs, vaccines, or other therapies that a pharmaceutical organization would like to introduce. They also look at whether or not there are new ways of using existing treatments, and those must go through a clinical trial period as well. So one of the things that is worth noting is that every medication that is on the market today, every medication, every vaccine, every procedure, every medical device has been put through a clinical trial. It has gone through a studied clinical trial. And there are two main types of clinical research. They are interventional studies and observational studies. What are the main differences between these research studies? In clinical trials where it is interventional, the clinical researchers assign participants to one or more interventions. In the observational studies, the researchers do not assign participants to an intervention. If there's an intervention the participants were already using, they keep using those interventions, but there is generally no assigned intervention. Now, of those two groups, there are these 4 breakout groups. So there are screening trials, and these look at ways to detect disease, for example. There are diagnostic trials, and these clinical trials look for better ways or less invasive ways to diagnose diseases. Preventive trials are those that look for ways to prevent a disease or a complication that occurs as a result of a disease. So those are important clinical trials. Then there are the last 2, quality of life trials that look for better ways of providing support or care for persons who are already ill. And these trials look for ways to offer them comfort and care while they are treated for their diseases. And then there are treatment trials, which is what our focus will be today. Treatment trials are for people who are most often familiar with treatment trials. This is what everybody thinks of when they think of clinical trials. And that is to study or look for medications and procedures that work better or are better tolerated with fewer side effects. Now, Who conducts clinical trials? That's an important question. Some people would say it's the government, others would say it's the private sector or the pharmaceutical companies. I'm happy to say it's a combination of both. It's a combination of both. So it could be the drug maker themselves, it could be an individual such as a doctor, it could be a contracted organization that's been hired by the drug manufacturer to work on its behalf to conduct a clinical trial. And it could be the government organization, such as in the United States, the CDC, for example, the Center for Disease Control. And who pays? The US government, the Indian government, if they participate in clinical trials, would pay. Drug makers, the organization that has commissioned the trial is the one who generally pays for the trial unless they are otherwise sponsored in that regard. Any questions for me before I go any further? Okay. Okay. Now, there are this is a comparative. So one of the things that I enjoyed about doing a comparative, that I enjoy really doing this comparative, was the fact that I learned so much and it made me very curious to learn more. And what I learned was about the Indian Council for Medical Research, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and how the government in India has been managing the clinical research space, not unlike the government in the United States. There are lots of information that is required. There are lots of hurdles that have to be crossed, but ultimately, we will discuss the comparisons a little bit later on as we go further. So we have these regulatory institutions that ensure that these clinical trials are run effectively, that they are efficient, that the data being collected is correct, that the regulations that govern clinical trials, that there are compliance measures that are enforced where these clinical trials are concerned. So the ethical framework of these clinical trials is very, very important. Very, very important. Now, these are the steps in a clinical trial, at least here in the United States or North America. So there's the drug discovery phase, and we will be able to count the years here. The clinical trial phase is a very lengthy period. And generally speaking, the drug discovery takes a very, very long time. And those are some of the factors that contribute to the cost of drugs here in North America. But let's look at what is involved. The drug discovery phase, including the lab research, can take anywhere from 3 to 5 years. The preclinical stage, 1 to 2 years, and that's where there is lab research in animals and on cells. And then there is phase 1, 2, and 3 of the clinical trial itself. And if you're counting the years with me, excuse me, if you're counting the years with me, you can see that that can take up to 7 years. From phase 1 to phase 3, to the completion of phase 3 can take up to 7 years. And then there is phase 4. But before I discuss phase 4, I'm going to move to the next slide to give you a better idea of what's involved there. Okay. So with phase 4 happens after the drug is approved. So we have the preclinical phase, we have phases 1 to 3, then we have the regulatory review, where that takes anywhere from 6 to 10 months up to a year sometimes. So in addition to the 7 years we discussed before, this could be an additional year, 10 months to a year. So that's 8 years there already. And following the approval, there is what is called a phase 4. And phase 4 is what is called aftermarket review. So the drug is widely distributed. It is made available to the public because it has gone through the many phases of the trial. But there still needs to be some long-term safety surveillance done on this drug. And so that safety surveillance for the efficacy of the drug happens in phase 4. And that is generally ongoing for some time. Now, I've laid the basic framework for clinical trials because clinical trials itself is a vast topic. But I needed to lay that framework so that we could then get an understanding of why it's so important to have diversity in clinical trial and why the comparisons are important. So having laid the foundation, I would love to now discuss with you and focus solely on diversity in clinical trials. Now, the question of diversity is, what is diversity? How do you define diversity? And we must first look at the definition. I was once a teacher, so I love using infographics, and because I think they are great metaphors for relaying information. So the question is, what is diversity? And the words are the condition of having or being composed of differing traits or characteristics. Now, if you look at the puzzle, you will notice that they are different colors, different shapes. Some are larger than others. Some are coloring outside of the lines. Some are red, yellow, green, blue. That is what diversity looks like. It is differing traits or characteristics that exist as a whole. Within the whole, there are differing traits and characteristics. And so as humans, we look at that culturally, we look at religious differences, racial, gender, orientation, age, disability, and class. Those are the different diversity types. Now, the question of diversity is answered, but what is required in clinical trials is not just diversity, but inclusion as well. And so we look now to what inclusion would look like. Again, we see what diversity is. And we understand that diversity at its best is inclusion. Diversity goes hand in hand with inclusion. And inclusion is the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different backgrounds. That is what inclusion is. So here we see the puzzle pieces are diverse. They are separate, they look different, they're differently colored, but inclusion means they come together to form one puzzle, each maintaining its individual characteristic. There's no need to change the language, there's no need to change their ethnicity or nationality. Each maintains its inherent characteristics. And so that is the important thing about diversity and inclusion. as we look at clinical trials. Now, for the United States, we look at demographics, and we look at the population, and this is from the last census that was conducted in the United States in 2020, I believe, and it shows the population. So Caucasian, 75.5%, African American, 13.6%, and so on and so forth. And you see the population numbers there. We look now, and this is where we begin our comparative. We look as well at your country, India, and we know that India is also ethnically diverse. Just based on the information here, you look back at the history and it explains the varying diverse peoples that are a part of your population of more than 1 billion people. What does that mean for clinical research? Ultimately, for clinical research, that means that India is a country that is primed for the outsourcing of clinical trials, for not only for diversity purposes, but since that is what we're discussing today, we will stay on that. For diversity purposes, India is primed for the outsourcing of clinical trials, and that has been happening. In my findings, that's what I found, that has been happening. Now, in the United States and in India, we realize that clinical trials lack both diversity and inclusion. So let's look at the numbers. In the United States, racial and ethnic minorities account for 39% of the population, but clinical trial participants account for 2% to 16% of the clinical trial participants. And I want to add, before I go any further, I also want to add that diversity does not only mean diversity of racial minorities or different racial groups. When we speak of diversity, we're speaking of people of diverse languages. We're speaking of, if there are more men participating in clinical trials, then we also need to speak with and ensure that more women participate. We're speaking of various ethnicities. We're speaking of persons who may be intellectually disabled or otherwise disabled. So those are the diverse groups that we would like to include in clinical trials. Now, intellectually disabled and other disabled persons make up 25% of the US population. So 1 in 4 persons who are disabled One in 4 persons are disabled in the United States. 1 in 4. Of this 25%, 75% are excluded from clinical trials. If they have an intellectual disability, they are excluded from clinical trials. 68% are excluded if they have a psychiatric disability. That is leaving a lot of information on the table. So we go back and we make the comparison. With 2 to 16% of the US population minority population participating in clinical trials, Outsourcing provides the opportunity, and I'm speaking now about outsourcing to India, provides the opportunity for some participant diversity. But as we go further, we will see that there are still issues there as well. Now, with regards to the intellectual disabilities group, there are also several factors that the United States government considered when it looked into why Indians participate or do not participate in clinical trials. And as they say, you can read it with me. Given the significance of specific cultural factors affecting enrollment and the central role of India in global trials, the objective of our study is to conduct a meta-synthesis of qualitative studies that evaluated factors contributing to participating of Indians in clinical trials. People are interested, governments are interested in what India has to offer in terms of clinical trials. The US government itself is interested, and I was fascinated by that. Now, for Afro-melanated people of African descent, the US population is 13%. But clinical trial participants are only 5%. Of that population, 5%. The Spanish-speaking population, Hispanic persons of all ethnicities, US population, 19%. But they have an even lower clinical trial participant rate, 1%. And so those numbers are worth paying attention to as we discuss what can be done about ensuring that there is diversity and inclusion in clinical trials. We move ahead. So what are the benefits and barriers to participation in clinical trial? Well, as I did my research, what I found was that the benefits and barriers were basically the same in both the United States and in India. And those benefits include personal health benefits, altruism, meaning the person who's participating in the clinical trial felt like they were doing something for the greater good of society. So they participated. Some of them felt like they trusted the physicians who were conducting the clinical trials. In India, it served as a source of income for some persons. And where there was detailed knowledge, where persons felt like they were given enough information, and where the methods of motivating the participants was acceptable, those factors were favorable in winning their participation in clinical trial. That was very, very interesting to me. That if they felt that there were motivating factors and they were satisfied with those motivating factors, then they were more willing to participate. As for the source of income, the United States has only just begun to think about monetizing clinical trial participation. It's not generally something that is done. So that's something that is being thought of as a way of incentivizing participation in clinical trials. The barriers that have been looked at, those barriers include mistrust, concerns about safety, psychological concerns, the burden of participating over lengthy periods of time, loss of confidentiality, meaning if a person is ill, they are afraid that their health information will be disclosed and they would prefer for that not to happen. Dependency issues and language barriers. Now, the issue of diversity and inclusion in clinical trials is such an important one that the Food and Drug Administration in the United States recently promulgated a rule that requires diversity action for clinical trials so that sponsors must relay diversity information to the regulator. The regulator is the Food and Drug Administration, and the Food and Drug Administration is now saying, we see that you're willing to make a change. We like it that you are thinking about making a change. Please, as you continue to make these changes, provide us with your statistics as to how you've begun to include more diverse groups of people in your clinical trials. Now, what are some of the things that the regulator recommends in order to attract more diverse and inclusive communities in the clinical trial space? So there is recommendation to consider more flexibilities. So if clinical trial participants live too far away and they have to travel, that is going to be a problem. So the Food and Drug Administration is speaking with sponsors to say, consider seeing participants less frequently. Consider not having them travel so far. And instead of having them travel to faraway sites, how about bringing the clinical trial sites to their communities? Another option is to ensure that sponsors find a way to reach non-English speaking participants, whether that means hiring translators, whether that means printing information in the language of the non-English speaking group. That is being encouraged, because persons cannot participate in clinical trials if they do not know about the clinical trials. They cannot participate if the information isn't there for them to learn about the clinical trials. And we already know, as we learned about the factors that affect Indian participants, we already know that if the motivating factors are favorable, then participants will want to participate in these clinical trials. The two very important things that sponsors have also begun to think about is utilizing the inherent advantage of affinity groups. So a lot of people would say, why does an affinity group matter? An affinity group matters because, for example, I'm here in the United States, you are in India, but you have people that you know all across the world. And the efforts that you make to say, you know, I went to a lecture where they spoke about the importance of clinical trials. Think about joining over there in the US. Look to see if there are any clinical trials you can join. Affinity groups matter because people speak to each other and you build on the relationships so that these efforts can be successful. Then the last one is utilizing social media in a way that does not violate the regulatory framework. And that's important because in the United States, there is a freedom of speech that is granted to all US citizens. And there is that tightrope that has to be walked in terms of offering medical information or information that supports issues in the medical field. So social media can also be a great addition to ensuring that diverse communities are brought into the clinical research space to include them in participation. Now, I want to go back a little bit because there is something else that we need to take a look at, and that is the eligibility criteria. Eligibility criteria is very, very important. And this morning, we bear in mind several things, but we cannot forget this part. Eligibility means the requirements that people who want to participate in clinical trials must meet, or the characteristics that they must have in order to participate in a particular study. And the eligibility criteria has two factors that must be considered. There is the inclusion criteria and the exclusion criteria. And they're self-explanatory, basically. The inclusion criteria are those things that if you possess those traits and characteristics, then you will qualify. The exclusion criteria, these are the criteria that if you possess those things, so for example, if a person is part of a bariatric study and they are too slim, that would likely be an exclusion criteria, because a bariatric study is one that works with persons of a certain weight to examine how bariatric surgery would impact their weight. So if someone does not meet that weight criteria, they would not be able to participate. Moving right along. Now, why is diversity in clinical trials important? Diversity in clinical trials is important, and as you can see, diversity both in your country in India and diversity here in the United States. And I'd like to say this: a lot of persons hold a misconception that India, for example, is a homogeneous society. And I was so pleased to learn about the various ethnicities and cultures and languages and religions that are a part of your Indian community. It's a beautiful, diverse group of people. And this makes it rich for clinical trials because there is this diversity. People live in different parts of the country. Their lives are different. Their food intake is different. Their physical activity is different. All of these things can be advantageous to participation in a clinical trial. So we look now at why, other factors that make clinical diversity important in clinical trials. People experience the same disease differently, and that's just the fact. As humans, we're all different, and we experience the same thing differently because our bodies are made differently. Including people with a variety of lived experiences, like I just said about your country and your many and varied cultures, including people with a variety of lived experiences and living conditions, enhances the study experience. Characteristics like race and ethnicity, age, gender, and sexual orientation, those factors play a great role in whether or not someone should participate in a clinical trial, because these are factors that can help to tell a researcher, tell a drug manufacturer about how a particular drug works in a person of a certain lifestyle, in a person of a certain age, and even in a person who's of a different gender. So these are very, very important categories. And so all communities can benefit from the scientific advances that are reaped from clinical trials. One of the things I say in my consultancy, I run a consultancy called the A Game Consultancy, where I work with organizations to recruit and advocate for diversity in clinical trials. One of the things that I say is that if your clinical trials are not diverse, then your information, the data that you're culling from these trials are not likely to be the fullest that they could be. They're likely to leave many questions because of the limited scope of the persons that have participated. So it is to the advantage of the sponsor, of the drug manufacturer, to ensure that the clinical trial is diverse. Then the other part is the more diverse a group of clinical trial participants is, the more we can learn about the safety and efficacy. And those are the two important factors for doing clinical trials. A drug cannot enter the market until it is proven to be safe and efficient for the purpose intended. So the more diverse groups participate, the more we can learn about the safety and efficacy of a potential drug or vaccine for people now and in the future. The more diverse a group, the more we can learn about potential medicines that work or do not work, right? Where we live, how we live, our background, all of that affects our health, as I mentioned before. The more inclusive the research population, the more researchers know about their health. So let's stop there for a minute. That in and of itself says something else, that clinical trials also offers more information than just safety and efficacy. It can also teach researchers about regional health, about geographical health according to the populations that live in each of these different places. So that's also very, very important when we consider why diversity is important, why inclusion is important, because where a person lives, how they've traveled, whether they've lived in one place and have moved to another place, did they at one point live in a space that was more low-lying? Did they move to a space that is now higher, more mountainous? How does that affect the lung? How does that affect their breathing? All of these things are so important. And the fine points of these help investigators to learn a lot about from clinical trials and about how to help communities as they face certain health issues. Winding down. The silver lining. The silver lining is that sponsors are willing, drug manufacturers are willing, governments are willing, and contract research organizations are willing. So in general, the community, the clinical trial and clinical research community is willing to make a difference so that more diverse communities can participate in the clinical trial process. And how are they doing this? We already discussed the regulation that was recently passed by the US government that required that sponsors and CROs indicate their diverse the mechanisms that they use to attract diverse participants. The other way that they're doing this, and I have three here, is organizations are taking the lack of diversity in clinicals very seriously. They are taking it seriously, so much so that they are now forming community partnerships with organizations such as my own, because we have affinity groups that we are a part of that we can help to spread the word and expand the reach of these drug manufacturers and sponsors. Sponsors are also open to working with community, as I said before, working with community organizations to ensure diversity. And they are more willing to enact more flexible options to accommodate diverse populations. We discussed some of those flexible options earlier, as we did here, bringing the clinical research site closer to the participants and so on and so forth. And that is the end of the presentation. Each year on May 20th, Clinical Trials Day is celebrated, or we try to get the word out about clinical trials. And so together we can bridge the diversity gap. That 1% in the Hispanic population, we can do more. And it is our job to do more because it helps to foster better health for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your detailed speech on the topic diversity in clinical trials. We all have got lot of information about the topic and importance of diversity in clinical trials. Thank you very much. Now, after this keynote speech, I would like to welcome Honorable Dr. N.G. Mali sir, former principal and BOS chairman, SRTM University, Nanded, who is also the chairman of technical session for this international e-conference. I also welcome chief guest of technical session, Dr. A. Kalgapure sir, chairman BOS in geography, SRTM University, Nanded. And after this, I would like to invite Dr. N.G. Mali sir to express his valuable words about the International E-Conference on the topic Perspective of Geography and Geographical Mapping. Welcome, sir.
Hello, good morning, everybody. On behalf of International E-Conference organized by Department of Geography, Shri Kumarswami, Mahavidyalaya, Ausa, District Latur, Maharashtra, on the topic Perspective of Geography and Geographical Mapping is an opportunity for the researcher and academicians. Resource person Annette, Duncan, Audrey Johnson, and Christian on York are great personalities in international level. Yesterday, many research paper was presented by scholars, but unfortunately, I was unable to join to this listen at them. I hope this conference fruitful by sharing the knowledge of various branches and field of geography. I express my best wishes for the event. Lastly, I congratulate to Principal Dr. M.M. Bedkar sir, Dr. S.B. Asture, Dr. P.B. Deshmukh and their colleagues for this important event. I am thankful to organizer inviting me as a chairman of the technical session. My best wishes to this event. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your precious words about the International E-Conference, which is organized by Shri Kumarswami College, Ausa.
Sir, just a minute. Dr. Rameshwar Prasad Singh is there from Bihar. Please request him to talk for 5 minutes.
After the
Hello. Thank you, Prachaj Mahoday, Kasturi and Chairman, sir, Madam from the USA. Very good information about this event. I am also very glad to know and detail see today your such conference. Very informative in all respects, sir. Thank you so much, sir. So I am not in a way. Thank you, sir. Thank you. From Bihar, Dr. Rameshwar Prasad Singh. Thank you, sir.
thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. The keynote speech, which is delivered by Honorable Annette Duncan ma'am, the expression and explanation was such that we all the people enjoyed it very well, and we are really enriched by the content of the speech. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Honorable Dr. N. Mali sir, for your thoughtful words about the International E-Conference. Thank you, Dr. Rameshwar Prasad sir. Now, after this, I would like to give charge to Dr. Asture sir, convener of this International E-Conference. Dr. Asture sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Betkar. Thank you to your team. Thank you to the college. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to each and every one of you for having me. Dr. Betkar, thank you for accommodating me tonight. I truly appreciate your understanding, and it really has been a pleasure being here. I had a fantastic time doing the research and learning so much about India, so much more about India. And I look forward to our continued conversations. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to your team. Have a great evening. It's 12:30 where I am, so I'm going to say good night. Yes, sir.
Now over to Dr. S.B. Asture sir for the technical session and remaining part of the International E-Conference in Geography. Please, Dr. S.B. Asture sir.
Sorry, there is no any presenter for today.
Okay. देशमुख सरांना वोट ऑफ थँक्स साठी बोलवायचं.
सर प्रेझेंटेशनला कोणी नाही आज, कुणाचंच नाव आलेलं नाही माझ्याकडे.
I think there is nobody today to present his or her paper in this international e-conference because most of the papers were presented yesterday and we had knowledge through it. Now at the end, I would like to invite Dr. P.B. Deshmukh sir for vote of thanks. Please sir, Deshmukh sir.
ठीक आहे, कन्क्लूड करतो सर मी. ओके सर.
हॅलो एव्हरीबडी. मला वाटतं आता आपले इंटरनॅशनल पार्टिसिपंट कोण राहिलेले नाहीये, तर मराठीतच बोलतो की कालपासून ही चालू असलेली जिओग्राफीची इंटरनॅशनल कॉन्फरन्स आहे. या कॉन्फरन्समध्ये अगदी एवढे पार्टिसिपंट्स आणि एवढे युनिव्हर्सिटीज येतील असं आम्हालाही वाटलं नव्हतं. कालपासून अगदी सगळेच आमच्या कामात असताना सुद्धा या कॉन्फरन्समध्ये जॉईन आहेत आणि मोठी संख्या कालही जॉईन होती, आजही आहे. आणि एक सक्सेसफुल कॉन्फरन्स आमच्या जिओग्राफी डिपार्टमेंटनी, कुमारस्वामी कॉलेजच्या जिओग्राफी डिपार्टमेंटने अरेंज केली. प्राचार्य बेटकर सरांचं यामध्ये मोठं योगदान राहिलं. सगळेच कॉन्फरन्स मधले पार्टिसिपंट्स, या सगळ्यांचं मी पुनश्च एकदा अभिनंदन करतो आणि ही कॉन्फरन्स आपण सक्सेसफुली पार पाडली याबद्दल मी आपल्या सर्वांचं अभिनंदन करतो आणि थांबतो. धन्यवाद.
Dr. Asture sir.
Yes sir, yes sir. On the behalf of this international conference, e-conference, organized by my department, Department of Geography, Shri Kumarswami Mahavidyalaya Ausa, from Maharashtra, India. We have organized this topic, this e-conference on the topic perspective of geography and geographical mapping. And all credit goes to our respected principal, Dr. M.M. Betkar sir. All organizing, planning and technical credit of this event goes to him. Many resource persons from international national level joined for this conference. One of them is Annette Duncan from Texas, USA. Shared her knowledge, her thoughts on diversity in clinical trials. And this lecture is one of the best lecture because we get very much from this lecture. Yesterday, Audrey Johnson from Tallahassee, Florida, United States, was invited for this conference. Many researchers, academicians has been presented their research papers yesterday. So, at last, I express my thanks to everyone. All presented research papers ensures the academic height and knowledge, guiding new researchers. We are unable to give an opportunity to everyone for the presentation due to some restrictions, lack of time. For that, we already say sorry, but we are assured we have forwarded abstract to us. We will offer him presentation certificate, and it is my kind request to our organizer, Dr. M. A. Bedkar sir, to give certificate everyone. Thank you very much.
What? हा हो सर घ्या नाही वोट ऑफ थँक्स घेतो सर मग. At the end of the International E-Conference, I am Pramod Deshmukh here to present vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to thank to the Honorable Chief Guest, Annette Duncan Madam, for her valuable keynote speech. I thank the Chief Organizer, respected Principal Dr. M. Bedkar sir. Now I thank Honorable respected Principal Dr. Mali sir and respected Professor Rameshwar Prasad Singh. I also thank Convener Dr. S.B. Asturi sir, Executive Member Dr. Lahane sir and Professor Dr. Karad sir. Finally, I thank all the participants from the bottom of the heart. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, sir. The third part of this international e-conference, we arranged to 21st December. So all the participants join to this third part. Thank you. Thank you so much.